Action.
Hi, hello everyone. Thanks for coming today. I'll talk about some hot takes I have around outer and inner alignment. Before I go into this talk, I want to emphasize, I think obviously a bunch of very smart, good people have done a lot of nice thinking using these frames, and I'm also not critiquing every possible way that anyone's ever used or thought of the concepts of outer and inner alignment. That being said, I think that we can realize massive benefits for the alignment research community if we drop some common ways to think about this problem. So let's see. My mouse might not be on the right screen. Is this one get focused? Okay. So here's the strategy I'll be talking about. We have an agent. Let's say we want the agent to make a bunch of diamonds. And one story we could tell for how we get this is, well, we capture what we want in a loss or grading function to some very high degree. And we'll call this outer alignment, like some loss function that's like grading, did this action or did this output further or advance the goal of making a bunch of diamonds. And then we use this loss function to train the AI to optimize its cognition to produce a trained network. And then step 3, we get the AI to exclusively care about optimizing that objective. And we'll call this inner alignment. So if we put these things together, we have some loss function which really well represents what it means to make diamonds or something. And then we train an AI which cares about optimizing that objective. And so then syntactically we can conclude this AI will optimize the objective as best it can, and because we did a good job with outer alignment, it'll make diamonds. I think there's some apparent benefits or attractive properties of this story. We have control over this outer objective in a way where it could just be a person deciding, do I press the reward button in this situation or not? That we don't have to write down some mathematical rule for when we press the reward button. We can just do it in certain circumstances, and so thereby represent an outer objective. I mean, human beings are the only known sources of human morality in the universe, and so if we kind of outsource the morality part to this outer objective that we have more control over, this could be a good idea. We leave the thinking to the AI in a sense, the optimization to the AI. We leave the evaluation and morality to us, or to black box functions of us, amplified people, and so on. We can hope to not need to tackle some pretty thorny problems maybe around how do you develop good values in an AI. And then there's some other benefits, but I think that, or apparent benefits, but I think on closer consideration, these benefits aren't either aren't worth it or aren't real. So I think this is an inappropriate frame for alignment, for both telling stories about how we might align an AI and as a target motivation for the actual artifact we wish to produce using SGD. So here's a high-level outline. If you succeed at inner alignment, you are basically ensuring that the agent won't terminally care about the same things we do, that the agent will care about the outputs of the objective function, will care about the evaluations of its plans. If you evaluate a plan based on diamonds, and then I'm like, Garrett, I'm gonna ensure that I'm gonna reprogram your mind so you only care about what I say about these different plans. If Garrett's considering, well, how do I have Alex produce a high output, this is not gonna be the same thing as how do I make diamonds, unless I'm actually perfectly grading in some sense. There's this way in which we're pointing the agent's motivation towards evaluations and not towards the actual thing we would want it to care about. And if you want to make this succeed, you need to make it so that the only way to achieve maximal evaluation is by actually making diamonds, which is a rather unnatural thing to do. You need to satisfy this exponentially difficult grading robustness property where it's well, there can't be plans where you mess up even somewhat. You can't just spuriously assign a single plan a really high number and then all the other plans are good, and the AI finds that bad plan and executes it and you messed up. And it's this is a very fragile property, and it arises from inner alignment. It arises from aligning an agent to an objective function or an evaluation function, and not from the alignment problem itself. That the loss function doesn't have to directly reflect what you want. The loss function is chiseling computational edifices into the network. If you look at the math of these optimization of these optimizers in terms of Atom or SGD, what they're doing is the loss is providing gradients to the network, I mean, that's it. You've got a data distribution, you like run the network over it, and then you get some losses, you use that to update the network, and like that's what loss is doing. It's a tool for developing networks with certain properties. And it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to represent what you want. And so this is like a restrictive assumption. And then also I think inner alignment is unnecessary, and it's also like a very difficult thing to do. It's like a very unnatural form for a mind to take, is to care about the output of some like objective or grading function, and to only care about this. I mean, obviously with evolution, evolution didn't get people to care about inclusive genetic fitness or any other thing it could be said to be optimizing people for. But also in human brains, like this has not happened. Human values are not aligned on the reward circuitry, which I think trains them. So like this has never ever happened. And like also I think this idea of we need to completely align the agent's motivations so that it's just thinking about how do I optimize this objective, this also doesn't seem necessary to me. So first, I'm going to talk about how this like outer alignment idea imposes this very, very severe, robust grading requirement. So when I say, well, like, what do we mean the loss function grades the agent's actions? What is it grading? I mean, in like Pac-Man or something in chess, it's pretty clear cut. It's fully observable. You see the state, you output like a reward number, and that's it. But like in reality, where it's partially observable, we're not like grading the entire, like as a function of the entire state of the world. So for now I'm gonna squint, and I'm gonna say that we squint and ignore this issue. I think the analysis is like the same without ignoring this, but it'll make it a little easier to talk about. Pretend we can just grade the outcomes, right? We can just grade the outcomes directly, and then achieving outer alignment would be like, well, the optimal policies for this like reward function over reality or something, or the reward function over plans, or the grader function over plans. Like the optimal plans have to be good. The optimal policies have to be good. This is a statement of outer alignment. And so like if you get the agent to care about this objective though, it doesn't care about diamonds. Now, what do we mean by it doesn't care about diamonds? It's not making decisions on the basis of whether, well, okay, if I like cross the room, if I like leave this room, will that lead to a diamond or not? It's not like making decisions as a function of, will these thoughts and plans bring me more diamonds? Will it bring me closer to diamonds? It's making decisions on the basis of, will this be incentivized by this objective function I'm aligned to? And like these are substantially different things. Like I think as a matter of as a falsifiable claim, I think the way people care about things is like, well, there's like, I know that if I went to the other room, there's like some diamonds laying down. Like maybe Garrett dropped some diamonds in the other room. It's like, I know Garrett well, I bet he dropped some diamonds. I could like run over and pick it up. And it's like, it's a function, there's like these contextual computations in my brain which will activate when I realize there's an opportunity for me to, say, acquire diamonds. And so like, it's not like there's some module in my brain that's like, I'm gonna grade whether you're actually about to do something that leads to you eating food. And then like another module in my brain is like, I'm gonna optimize the outputs of this like grader or something. An agent which cares about diamonds or about food is gonna make decisions based on its beliefs about whether a plan leads to diamonds or food. Like, these agents which care about the objective function don't care in that way. And you can try to get an agent which cares about evaluations to make diamonds by making diamonds the only way to get high evaluations. So this is known as objective robustness or robust grading. So we would need to ensure that the AI cannot find a plan where it gets high reward, low loss, like minimal loss, but we aren't happy with the plan. And if this isn't true, then an inner aligned smart AI would be incentivized to find and execute that plan, because it only cares about the evaluations if it's inner aligned. And so yeah, but talking about the diamond example, I think this is doomed. One of the reasons I think it's doomed is because it requires satisfying this for all quantifier across all possible plans that we need to grade. Like we need to grade every plan that the AI could come up with. This is just like, there's like so many plans. This seems like extremely infeasible to me. And that there cannot exist a findable by the AI rewarding plan which deviates from what we want. So this is going to be like, if you imagine like the space of plans is like, well, you've got like t time steps, then this is going to be an exponential and t robustness guarantee that you need to satisfy against something which is possibly significant, is like significantly smarter than you. And so there can't be findable adversarial inputs. This setup has incentivized the AI to find and exploit adversarial inputs in however we're grading, like via the outer objective function. So it could be like like one outer objective we could have is like, well, imagine a ton of, suppose we can amplify people, make them smarter, and have them retain their values, and like we have the AI imagine these amplified smart people thinking about the plan for like 1,000 years and then writing down, and here's how many diamonds in expectation this plan will lead to or something. I mean, it's a pretty weird thing to do, but this is like outer alignment we're talking about. And so like even if you achieve this, even if you like have this massive alignment success of specifying and pointing the agent to a grader, which is grading on this basis, then like it's still going to have adversarial inputs to some level of adversary. Like there is still some like that. What if humans are systematically compromised in some way because we were not designed to be secure against adversary systems, such that if you flash a certain sequence of like QR codes in front of them, they will become ecstatic and yes, like 10 trillion, this plan leads to like 10 trillion diamonds. I mean, this is a huge space of things we have to be robust against. And while there exists good mathematical functions which specify graders that are like, yep, no bogus, there's like no bogus adversarial inputs allowed, just whitelist some reasonable plans, and then like it does in fact assign the highest grade to the plan, which like maybe does lead to a ton of diamonds, we're not going to find it. And also there's a less obviously doomed, but I think it's still doomed approach of, well, we have an AI at time t that's like an actor that's like, well, I'm going to come up with plans. We have another grader at time t, and like we make them both smarter together, and like maybe we can do this and get smarter and smarter overseers this way. And I'm basically just like, no, this is not this is worth like responding to, but I'm not going to respond to it here. In my opinion, it's just like, no, this is not going to work. Physically implemented systems, or like systems pointed to or trained via ML, will admit strange edge cases that like smart adversaries can find. You're not gonna like interalign this AI to like this perfect Platonic grading function, because there's a bunch more Platonic grading functions that do have adversarial inputs. So like this like setup where you don't motivate an AI to actually care about diamonds, but you motivate it to care about evaluations, and then try to make it so the only way to get high evaluations is by making diamonds, violates the toaster principle. Now the toaster principle, as I call it, Eliezer's non-adversarial principle, where like you shouldn't build a system which is running computations that are trying to hurt you if they succeed. Like it should not be running a search where if the search succeeds, you are like you'll get hurt. You should not build a toaster by having a flamethrower and then like a freeze ray, and then like they cancel each other out, and it's like just nicely like a little bit warmed. Similarly, you should not have an actor which is trying to come up with adversarial inputs, and then a grader which is trying to guard against adversarial inputs. Like you should not have a system which is where the parts are working at such like extreme cross purposes to each other in the intended setup. So I think this is like a hint like, hey, at least we're wasting effort in computation. Like there should be a better way to do things than this. Also, I think we've tried and failed to find robust grading methods for a range of real world goals. It's not like, well, sure, human value is pretty complicated, like what do we want to do with the future, but we know how to grade whether an AI has picked up 5 flowers. I mean, we don't know how to do that. We don't know how to grade for diamonds, or human values, or like just putting a strawberry on a plate. And the reason we can't do this is because we have to satisfy this exponential guarantee, because we're trying to do the unnatural thing of get an agent which cares about evaluations of X to actually care about X. So this suggests this like high fixed cost to using this kind of scheme, and it comes from incentivizing evaluations, but trying to get the agent to actually just care about diamonds, even though it doesn't, in some sense. Also, I think it's fairly easy to tell stories and like detail motivational architectures, which don't involve robust grading. I mean, I think it's kind of the norm. I wrote a post called "A Shot at the Diamond Alignment Problem," where I walk through here's what I think happens when you train an agent with this kind of curriculum. I think it'll develop maybe this kind of internal cognition at this time, and then you run more updates on it, and this happens, and so it's like very step by step. I think it was like there was no point where I was like, oh man, like I wish I had a robust grading rule or something. Before I move on to the next section, do people have questions right now? Yes.
Seems. Yeah, I want to push back on the twister problem thing.
Yeah.
If I imagine that there's some kind of optimizer, and like most of the time it's like making things marginally better, but there's still a potential for it to find an adversarial output, and once in a while it finds one, and then our grader system has to work harder to make the optimizer robust against that. I wouldn't characterize that as the optimizer trying to find an adversarial input. It's just like something weird that happens once in a while.
So I'm trying to instantiate this as, well, imagine that like I'm watching TV and usually I'm like, yep, I'm not gonna buy any of the stuff on the commercials, but sometimes it's like this hyper optimized commercial that comes on. I have to be like, no, like I installed that, like I thought about what to do in this situation. Even if it looks really good, I'll just wait till tomorrow, see if I like still really want the product. Like there's a kind of mini adversarial input to my decision making maybe, and then I've got a rule that I do extra effort, and like, well, I'm just gonna like wait a bit. Well, and then like this is like, it's not like, yeah.
I think this
is that like that?
I think it's a bit different. I think it'd be more like if they're watching like edutainment that is actually valuable for you, but once in a while it goes off the rails and tries to advertise something for you.
Okay, and so then you would be saying, well, this doesn't seem like that big of a deal.
Well, I was saying I wouldn't characterize it as like trying to find adversarial examples if it only does that once in a while.
Yeah. So I've got two immediate reactions as I understand what you've said. First, I would still recommend building a system which, like, if possible, doesn't need to deal with this. Now, I don't think you can just totally avoid adversarial inputs to cognition, but I think it's a quantitative matter. Like I don't think people, for example, are grader optimizers or have a robust grading rule, but also I don't think that people are immune to them, of course. My second reaction is in the like robust grading paradigm, you are incentivizing an inner-aligned actor or agent to propose plans which rate as highly as possible, and so naturally, if the grader is instantiated or is computing a function of like what a person would think about it, if there's any execution paths which make the person decide differently and output a higher number for reasons unrelated to like diamondness of the plan, then it'll be incentivized to find it. So I think in this design pattern you are explicitly incentivizing exploiting the grader if possible. So I would carry, like if there's adversarial inputs for high numbers, like the agent will try to find them, would be my claim. So yes. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Any other questions right now?
Yeah, for some tasks, like maybe playing chess, it seems to me that doing some kind of search over lots of different options is pretty intrinsically necessary to do that kind of task well efficiently. And I guess I'm wondering, like, to me that seems like you automatically have to have some kind of grader that like tells you which of your different positions at the end of your move sequence is good and which isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess how does a system like that look like that sort of robustly wants diamond instead of maximizing for some grader implicitly?
Yeah. So I think that an agent which is like it's really fast at thinking. It thinks about a bunch of different plans. Like maybe it's like, well, I'll have this. I'll like parallelize. I'll split off. Come up with a bunch of different ideas like this. Part of me will think about improvements to like the refinement process or something. This one will think about like resource acquisition, and then like they'll all do some search, and we'll come back together and merge it into like one coherent plan, considering all the opportunities available. And like with this agent, it could be searching over a lot of plans, but like the point of its search isn't to maximize its own evaluation. Like the point of it, like it'll come up with a plan it evaluates highly, but that's a side effect of the search. It's not like the terminal point of the search, right? So like an agent can be making decisions on the basis of diamonds, or like how many diamonds its world model predicts conditional on a certain plan. And it may also be aware, hey, if I thought about all possible plans, I would predict abstractly that I would get tricked by something, and that would not lead to many diamonds. And like the agent can be considering different plans and grading them without like terminally caring about the evaluations themselves. Like the evaluations are a tool it uses while it's thinking in order to rate different possibilities, and it uses that tool because it thinks it'll lead to more diamonds. Does that make sense? So like an alternative setup might be an agent which like a person's like, oh man, I really wish I thought I had a bunch of diamonds, and I'll do anything to find a thought that'll make me, or to like find the thought that makes me believe this in my gut, right? And like the point of its search would be to find a very highly evaluated thought, but not to actually make diamonds. That makes sense.
Would you say that, for example, Alpha Zero with tree search, like terminally cares about producing like board states that have a high value on this value network, or is it just a confused way to think about it, or does like AlphaScale not have terminal values in this sense because it just isn't self-reflective in some way?
Yeah, so I think you could describe it both ways. I don't think there's an opportunity for these kinds of motivations to come apart in that setting.
Mm-hmm.
It's also kind of it's also there's several other properties which make it more amenable to like an outer alignment style analysis. It's like you can adjudicate whether you've won or not. It's pretty clean. It's fully observable. It's like algorithmically gradable. So I wouldn't describe that one as either, or maybe I describe it as both. I don't know. I'd probably just say it's like doing tree search on this evaluation function. Anything else?
Your toaster principle, does this mean you are also very pessimistic about things like AI safety via debate and that kind of thing?
So it depends what we're intending. This is another clarification I should have brought up. When I criticize grading, I'm not saying you shouldn't grade the AI while you're training it and then give it updates. Like I think that's totally fine. I'm talking about when the intended deployment motivational structure of the agent is that you've got something that's like, well, you've got this evaluative submodule, and this could be real, or it could be like, well, what would this specific simulation of Albert Einstein think about this plan I'm going to do? Like, I want to find plans which would be rated highly by this specific function, or plan grading function. And in terms of debate, you could have one that's like, well, I want an agent which is optimizing for winning the debate, right? And I would guess that this is not good in many rich contexts. Although I haven't thought a bunch about debate in particular for this, I would guess that it's not good as a grader scheme. But in terms of training, it could be fun. I'm not making a claim as you can't, possibly training things with debate is a great idea. But motivating intending for the trained agent to be motivated in a way where it's trying to win a debate seems significantly less good to me. It seems quite questionable, and want to think about that way more carefully in light of these points.
What's the difference?
So, when you could be using debate, like an AI's performance on a debate game to give it plus or minus one reward, which would then trigger the policy gradient and update its cognition, without necessarily the agent optimizing for that reward or for the function which computes that reward, which would be winning the game of debate. The agent's being optimized by the debate game, but it's not optimizing for the debate game.
Oh, you mean it's not running an internal search?
Or kind of. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily classify as internal search, but yeah, that's one way of looking at it.
But if it ultimately ended up really caring about winning the debate, that would be bad.
Yes, I would expect something to go wrong there, but again, I haven't analyzed that particular setup. Yeah. Anything else? All right. So section 2 is that the loss function is a chisel, so to speak. There's a post I've got called reward is not the optimization target, where I say if you look at the math in a policy gradient approach, where the agent does some stuff, it bumps around in a maze, and maybe it reaches the end, it gets +1 reward, -1 reward. This constitutes its data distribution, and then you do updates based on this data distribution, upweighting logits on actions which were judged to have led to reward. Maybe you use a critic network and get a better reward signal that way, but ultimately all these things are doing, all that these reward and advantage signals are doing is providing gradient updates to a network. And in particular, they're not necessarily a goal, so to speak. In MDPs, they kind of are, or they're viewed that way. And often when you read RL papers, they'll be the point of RL is to train agents which maximize expected reward. And this could be our intention for RL, but it's not usually what RL actually does unless you satisfy certain convergence theorems. What RL does in these policy gradient approaches is use reinforcement events to provide cognitive updates to the network. And so if you view reward that way, it's providing, it's chiseling cognition into agents, using the reward events as the thing which drives in, maybe you get a reward event for solving a maze. When you go right, when you're in the presence of, the maze exits to the right, but if you go right when you're near a wall, then nothing happens, and so you do a batch update, and then that update has to make you behave differently in the presence of a wall to the right, as opposed to the maze exit to the right. You upweight logits in one situation on going right, you downweight logits maybe or do nothing in the other situation. So over time, this trains a network to discriminate and act differently in situations according to its historical reward events. But it doesn't necessarily make an agent which cares about reward or is optimizing for reward or optimizing for some function that was computing reward. Reward is like the cognitive update provider for these kinds of agents. And so if we think about what's going through that frame, we think about what's going on with outer and inner alignment. Here's the training story that describes what we want to happen. We want to find a robust diamond grading loss function, which optimizes the network so that the network wants to optimize the loss function which optimized it. When the agent optimizes this loss function as hard as it can, the agent makes diamonds. And this is kind of weird, I think. I'm like, why would he do this? This is like, there's this tool which is presented to us by the loss function that can provide cognitive updates and can upweight certain kinds of cognition in the agent, such that if you're like, yep, the agent crossed the room when it saw that there was like a blue object, but whenever it did it for red objects, it's penalized. It's like, well, maybe I've instilled some cognition in the agent which discriminates between approaching red and blue objects. Maybe that's one way I've thereby affected the generalization behavior of the agent. We want an agent which generalizes well, i.e. does things we want in the relevant situations. And if we use this story, we're not only using this loss function as like a way of changing the agent's cognition, we're also trying to represent what the agent's supposed to be doing with the thing that is just like a chisel. Like it's just providing gradients. It's like kind of like, well, I want to make the statue, and like what kind of chisel should I use? And it's like, I know, I'll use a chisel which looks like the statue I want to make or something. There's like internal goals we want the agent to have. There's also a loss function, which is a tool for modifying the network. And the loss function doesn't have to look anything like the intended goals, is my point here. And so this assumes that this chisel should also embody the target goals, which is pretty restrictive, because, you know, like, what about reward shaping? You look in animals with dogs, you're training a dog to do tricks, you like reward it with a treat, which I think triggers the actual, like, this kind of reward in the dog's brain. And like when it maybe lifts its paws off the ground a little bit, you give it a treat, and then it does it some more, you give it even more of a treat, and therefore you can get it to do really impressive things. And the reason this works, I think, is because you're differentially upweighting cognition that is like closer and closer to the thing you want. You're like using these reward events to chisel the target cognition into the dog. And similarly with AI, you have like the backflip result that Cristiano had in like 2017 with OpenAI. They used human reward evaluations, or like trajectory comparisons, to train a reward model, which then like rewarded the agent, I think, for being closer and closer to doing a backflip. Then they got the agent to do the backflip. And so like this was like the chisel. It was not like we intrinsically valued the agent looking slightly more like it was going to do a backflip necessarily. It's just, this is a tool we had to get the desired goals into the agent. So if we're just thinking about the loss function supposed to be like, how good is this thing, is this state, is this action? This can often work as a rule of thumb, but like it's not strictly true, right? Like the thing that loss is actually doing is providing gradients. And if we're thinking about loss as like representing goodness, we are losing track of like the underlying mechanistic reality of the problem, and I think this can be problematic. So like I mentioned this statue point. Also thinking about the loss function as a chisel encourages thinking about the dynamics of SGD, what the updates are actually doing to the network. I think it really grounds speculation in terms of like, well, like if like I provided an update to an agent, like if I provided like higher reward when the agent is, say, going towards like a red object later in training, is this going to provide a bigger cognitive update, to like a bigger change to the generalization properties than if I did the same thing earlier in training? Or like it'll like let you very easily think about what kinds of networks are we actually developing, and not being like, well, okay, reinforcement learning trains like agents which maximize reward, and so like you can't use that to get human values. I mean, this sounds, most people wouldn't say that these days. This is basically all superintelligence had to say about using RL, or like in the section I looked at, is like, well, RL trains agents which maximize reward, and reward that's not compatible with human values. So like we need something else. Was basically the like 3 paragraphs in superintelligence on this topic of like, can you use RL to get good values in an agent? There's like these new considerations you can think about, like, well, okay, if rewards providing updates, if loss is providing updates, then when should we focus most of our energy in giving feedback to the network? I mean, how important is a late training update? Like if the agent's proposing some plan where it's like, okay, I'm gonna build like this like global supply chain, like how good is this plan? And it's like already got some like local supply chain set up and some factories it's managing. And then it's like got some plan, it's like, I don't think this is gonna lead to nanobot swarms, but like I'm not really sure. And it's like at this point, it's probably too late. Because if the AI is agentic and it doesn't want to be modified by further updates, it could just secretly set the learning rate to 0, such that like TensorBoard doesn't tell you about it. And like whatever number you output might not even affect the network's cognition. So considerations like this would make me think, oh, it's like earlier in training and mid-training where we should focus most of our energy on getting the value formation correctly, on determining the generalization properties, on how it's making decisions. And so like thinking about it mechanistically in this sense has been extremely helpful for me. And also it's just like correct. It's like this connotation of chisel can be inappropriate, to be clear. If you think like maybe chisel suggests some things that are slightly askew to what the math is actually doing, but thinking about loss is like, well, it's providing updates to the network is just like mathematically what is happening, what is being implemented in the training processes. And so then lastly, I think that this frame is fairly unnatural. I think it's worth considering as one of the distinguished members of the only known artifacts to care about each other. How did your values form? Why do you make decisions in the way that you do? In particular, why do you care about your own family or about your friends? Is it because you are trying to optimize your reward the function computed by your reward prediction circuits, and it just turns out that these circuits are very smart, and the only way to optimize this is by caring about your family? And the answer is going to be no. I'll make that falsifiable prediction. That another analogy is, well, imagine if we tried to raise a child. It's like, how can I make this kid do well at school, care about people, give back to the community? And then you come up with some very complicated incentive scheme whereby the only way they can get financial support from you is if they're really studying at school, and they can't just be texting you some pictures of them working hard that they staged. You've got you're okay, my kid's at college now, and I know that they're not just they didn't just have a photo op of them working with their friends. I know for some reasons maybe I have transparency on their brain or something, or I can pin down no, that's not what's happening. The only way for them to get financial support from me is by actually doing well at school and being altruistic. And this is a very unnatural thing to do, to incentivize a kid to care about financial support and then try to arrange the financial support so the only way they can get it is by doing what you have in mind. There's also another point I want to make here where humans are at least not optimizing their reward prediction circuits as hard as possible. And one of the reasons this is relevant is on my understanding of how humans work, of why we care about the things we do, why we generalize in the way we do, why when you're near donuts you're maybe I should grab the donut, or you're thinking about your family and you miss them, you're I should give them a call. It's well, what's influencing your decisions? And the way I think this develops is through both self-supervised learning and reinforcement learning off a largely locally randomly initialized brain. And under this model, the question of, well, what happens when you run sophisticated RL agents in reality? How do they develop their motivations? And if it turned out that they were, they did kind of inner align on their reward circuitry, not necessarily literally, either literally or, well, there's some function that's well, I value eating sugar in particular. That's the function being computed by my taste bud reward circuitry. I value eating sugar. I'd call either of those inner aligned to the reward circuitry. The reward circuitry trains some values which are optimizing, the grading rule that was implemented by the reward circuitry. And I think humans do neither. So I think that people don't, are not motivated by wireheading. We sadly, I think, have very good evidence this is true for many people, because in the 80s, some very wise researchers sent this woman home with a brain stimulation reward device, which stimulated the reward centers in her brain. And there's just a nice little button you can press to release more reward. And so she was found having spent, or her family brought her in for help after she was found having spent days stimulating this reward button until she developed a sore on her finger. Now, under the hypothesis that people are like, yeah, reward is great, like the neuroscientists know about reward, and they'd be like, this is excellent. We finally found a way to like achieve our values, and this is obviously not what their reaction was, I think. And similarly, like soldiers throw themselves on grenades. Like this is not the best way for them to be optimizing the like time discounted sum of their reward circuitry, or even like the functions which were computed by their reward circuitry. I'll make the falsifiable in principle. No one goes falsify this place or test this directly. That like the soldiers making this decision was not like the thing which was like dictated by the reward circuitry at the time, such that there was no like other plan which like did better for the, you know, like, well, they're like sugar reward, you know, like they could have gone home, you know, a bunch of sugar, done a bunch of drugs. Like this is probably not the thing which optimized the functions represented by the reward either. And so like under this model, human values themselves, the reasons we make decisions, are inner alignment failures on our reward circuitry. And so the human values aren't aligned with the reward circuitry which train them. Since this is the only known example of general intelligence's forming values, if you try to solve outer and inner alignment, you are ruling out the only known methods for growing human compatible values. So in an abstract sense, this would make me less surprised if we spent a bunch of time trying to solve outer and inner alignment, and it turns out, well, this is just like extremely tough because we like assumed away much more promising approaches for controlling generalization, for like ensuring that AIs, or like increasing the chance that AIs grow good values. Lastly, I think we don't need complete inner alignment on one goal. So in the sense of you get the AI that say just care about the diamond grading function. Why does AI only have to care about that? To consider whether, well, like someone who cares 100% about diamonds somehow, like that's their only like real like non-instrumental drive is diamonds. And then you consider modifying that person. So like now they like dogs a bit too. It's like, well, they both make diamonds, I claim. And the reason they both make diamonds is like these values. I view values, like I'm talking about values, and when I say values, I'm talking about like an influence on decision making. And if you're grading plans by like, well, if the plan has like me hanging out with dogs, then like more likely to like upweight the logits on that plan, so to speak. If the plan is like me getting a bunch of diamonds, according to my world model, like that's great too, I'll upweight the logits that way. What kind of plans do you think would be selected by this kind of procedure? Well, probably plans which satisfy all the like, or many of the major values, like plans which incorporate both diamonds and dogs. And so it seems like, no, you don't need the AI to only care about this. There's many like ways that an agent could think and care such that it ends up making diamonds, perhaps as one of many things that it cares about. So I think this would still lead to lots of diamonds, and I think it's anti-natural to try to avoid this. I think that if you do like reinforcement learning, if you do different kinds of supervised learning, some kinds of supervised learning, in an agent in reality, like agents will just form a bunch of what I call values, or like contextual influences on decision making. Suppose an agent starts off, it only cares about diamonds. Like it's got some kind of world model, it's going around doing reinforcement learning, doing self-supervised learning, and then like it keeps thinking about plans, it's doing RL, it's doing self-supervised learning, and it's like choosing plans on the basis of, well, if I think it's gonna lead to diamonds, I'll take the plan. If there's a diamond nearby, I'll walk over there. Basically a bunch of if something related to diamond, then like increased chance of getting the diamond, like subroutines in the network. And then the agent finds itself thinking for like the 1000th time, well, what would happen if I like died in this plan? Like, let me model that in detail for a while. And it would conclude, oh yeah, I think that would not lead to many diamonds. So I shouldn't do that. And eventually it's like, hey, I shouldn't die, right? Like it'll like cache this, because in the real world, agents will need to be caching computations that happen all the time. And so one way this can pan out is, well, the agent has this contextual, if you're going to die in a plan, then like be less likely to do that plan, all else equal. And so then this could be like an anti-death value. Even if you start off with just one kind of value, I think caching computations, I think doing reinforcement learning, having a broad source of like reasons that I think reward will chisel a whole range of decision-making influences into an agent. Looking at the way people work, I mean, people have a bunch of different values, which I infer in large part come from reinforcement learning. So I think this is just part of doing RL, and I think there's some behavioral evidence from someone like the Mesa, or from some of the Golmas generalization experiments I've looked at. There's some behavioral evidence that these AIs have multiple decision-making influences. So now at this point you might be like, okay, Alex, we know that alignment's hard. We know that there's a whole bunch of challenges, but like, what are we supposed to do if we're not going to be talking about, say, outer and inner alignment? I mean, maybe it's still the case, like, yeah, okay, this sucks, but like, you know, it's tough. Like, we don't know much better. I think if alignment's hard, it's not hard for these reasons. Like, there are some other plans you can use. Like, if you use a reward function to produce decision making in the AI, which is like if diamond, basically, then pursue. Obviously not that exactly, but a whole bunch of subroutines which look like this. If the AI is making decisions on the basis of, well, does this lead to diamonds or not? Then if this AI gets smarter, it's going to want to keep like making diamonds. It's not going to be like searching for inputs which fool itself about making diamonds, because that the reflective agent would predict, no, that's not going to like actually make diamonds. I'll just get fooled. I mean, I don't think you need like this infinitely wise or like extremely wise grader to produce decision making in an agent which robustly acquires diamonds. And ultimately, that's what we care about. We cared about, I think, this grading rule because it would help us get good AI behavior. But instead of thinking about what's the abstract utility function that we then align the AI onto, what if we just cut out the middleman? It's like, how do we get like good decision-making subroutines into the AI such that that is the AI's values and that does steer future training? I think this is still a big challenge, to be clear. I'm not saying like, and it's like a breeze now. Like, I don't in fact know how to do this with high probability. But what I'm saying is like, I think this is the direct like approach. It seems quite promising to me, and it has serious like things that I don't understand and like obstacles. But I think there's basically like strictly fewer difficulties. Like you don't have to like grade every possible plan. I think this is a huge relief. You don't need to like adversarially arrange the evaluations arrange the evaluations such that they're safe under extremal good heart, something so that it can't be optimized. You can instill cognition like this, and I detail this. I go into much more detail here in a shot of the diamond alignment problem. And so like basically I'm like, look, there's these frames that I don't think are very productive, that seem to like add a bunch of difficulty to the problem. In some situations, I think it's appropriate. Like with chess, I don't want to be thinking about, okay, when do I like reward the AI when it takes an agent, or like when it takes, how much reward do I put for when it takes a bishop, or like as opposed to a queen, and like what kind of decision making would that like upweight like or chisel into the network? And it's like, look, it's gonna explore into win states. Just give it win reward, and like you do RL enough, it'll like basically like there's nowhere else for it to generalize to. You're staying on distribution. It's algorithmically checkable. It's fine. Just reward it for the like fully observable reward function. It's okay. You don't need to think about that. But in situations where we care a lot about generalization, we do need to think about, well, what is the reward going to chisel into the agent? So it's not that I think it's never appropriate, but I think it's like for alignment often not that appropriate. So I think like some of these abstractions are like broken or make the problem significantly more difficult by in part obscuring the like mechanistic underpinnings of what we're actually trying to do. Rather than be like, and here's the new thing to do, I'd be really excited for people to think more and kind of like undo a bunch of maybe cache thinking. Like I definitely had a bunch of cache thinking about, well, you know, if the objective is slightly wrong, if the values are slightly wrong, they get good-hearted because there's like flaws get blown up. It's like, well, actually, I like kept trying to think that, and like I kept like throwing errors basically because like actually it seems like this is only true if you're in outer and inner alignment. Like there are a whole bunch of like wisdom or like common wisdom in alignment that seems like no longer true outside of outer and inner alignment based approaches or target motivational structures. So be really excited for people to just go and think for themselves, what are we trying to do? What mechanistically is happening during a learning process? What kind of AI cognition would be conducive to a good thing actually happening? And then seeing which abstractions seem most appropriate for you. So one thing which happened for me was like I found myself one day I was like, wow, I haven't thought about good heart on my own in like weeks, or like I haven't thought about like nearest unblocked strategy or something. And I at the time, or like I wasn't thinking in terms of outer and inner alignment, and it wasn't until I came back later it's like, oh, here's why I wasn't. Like now I can articulate some reasons, but at first like, oh, well, I'm just going to run with my new ontology and see like where that takes me. And I think that's been extremely productive. So on that note, I'm going to end the talk, and I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you. maybe we'll keep it on for a little bit, and then if anyone has any questions they want to ask off camera, we'll do that. Anyone?
I confess I haven't read your post a shot at the diamond alignment problem, but I'm curious if there's any ideas in it that can't be expressed in the inner outer alignment frame. Like, for example, if there's any like shaping in there.
Yeah. I think I'm basically like, so I think the shot at the diamond alignment problem would be like instantly concluded doomed under outer and inner alignment, because it's not trying to be outer alignment. Just like, yeah, there's going to be, we like, we train this big multimodal model on a bunch of, this big multimodal model on like the whole internet and a bunch of like videos. So it's like got vision and text, and maybe it's got like, then maybe we do some like imitation learning on a range of video games and like embodied robotics tasks, and you get this like big network, and you also put some emphasis maybe on texts about diamonds, people doing things to acquire diamonds in the imitation learning part of the corpus or distribution, people like making decisions actually as a matter of fact on the basis of whether it'll lead to diamonds. And then from this you do some like maybe do some embodied RL training to begin with, where you like the agent is just near some diamonds and it can like explore into it quite easily, where we can give it like a sparse reward whenever it like physically touches a diamond, for example. And then like maybe we can start making it more and more complicated, or we can give it like, we can have it like solve mazes, and there's like a diamond at the end of the maze in the video game, or there's like it solves a maze and then it gets a diamond in reality, and we give it one reward, and we say like, you just got this diamond because you, or like, you just got this reward because you solved the task and then got the diamond, and solving the task helped you get the diamond, right? And maybe like these kinds of things will narrow the update onto like diamond relevant abstractions, and not just like because it was shiny, for example, or maybe in addition to because it was shiny. And if you're thinking about this from outer and inner alignment, you're like, well, obviously just trick the humans into giving you a reward when you haven't done anything useful at all, and like you instantly conclude it's doomed. And it's like, well, I think if you actually run like when I run the mechanistic analysis, it seems quite plausible that just you get an agent which is making decisions on the basis of diamonds, gets smarter, keeps making decisions on the basis of diamonds, eventually gets quite smart, it plots a plan, and it kills you, and then it makes a bunch of diamonds, among other like things like related to playing video games or staying alive or like approaching shiny things or something. And like in the world where we're just like trying to, can we get an agent which makes diamonds, I think that'd be a great success. And so like you would just conclude you can't do that in outer and inner alignment.
Okay.
I think I'm a little bit confused about the slide that you had earlier, where part of the difficulty of inner alignment is that it's anti-natural to get the system to care about just one thing. And I think the thing that's confusing to me there is that it seems like the one thing that we want them to care about isn't something as clear-cut as diamonds, where you can go like, yeah, the trade-off between the like one aspect of this thing and other aspects of this thing is pretty clear-cut. Like, if you cared about diamonds 100% versus if you cared about diamonds 70% and then human freedom 30%, then like plausibly you'd still get plans which result in diamonds, except one might have some sort of regard for like what happens to humans in the process, and one might not. Like, part of the difficulty to me seems like you will have side effects when you execute on the thing that you care about, and the degree to which you care about those side effects is also encoded in the thing which you care about. If you don't think about those side effects at all, then then it just won't register. Like, it won't seem like you're doing anything bad.
So are you saying if you haven't, I'm not quite sure if here's what I understood.
Yep.
You have an agent that mostly make decisions on the basis of diamonds, but also to some extent on human freedom, and like it could have maybe bad effects on people, and it would not consider those to be bad if it didn't like have values for avoiding those.
Yeah, like it seems like it's never one thing, or if you choose to think of it as one thing, that thing is already like a collection of a bunch of different things that we wanted to care about, because human values is sufficiently complex that it's not any one thing.
Yeah. Yes. So are you saying, well, and then how does this relate to the it's like hard to care about one thing? Or are you saying, well, human values aren't one thing?
Yeah.
So I agree.
Like, I'm saying that when we try to do inner alignment, we're actually trying to align to any single thing. We're trying to align to this like complex bag of values or something.
Yeah, so I suppose it depends on who's thinking about it. The way I've understood it has been usually there's like some objective function which could be computed as a function of many considerations, like how how much freedom do people have, like is their coffee still, or is that like banned for some reason, and some like a bunch of other obviously those are the two main human values.
Yeah.
But maybe other things as well, and like but then you would interline the agent to exclusively care about this objective, which is computed as a function of many different
Right.
objectives.
So the argument is that you still align on one metric. The metric is just an aggregate of a bunch of things we care about, but it's still one metric.
Yeah, that's been my understanding of how inner alignment's usually talked about. People use words different ways sometimes, but
Okay.
yeah.
I have a question about this combination of different goals. So, like, I can imagine some frameworks, for example, if the goals are kind of additive and you kind of have like a large space, then it could be that you always set like only pursue one of the goals and neglect all the others or so.
Yeah.
So you presumably you have something in mind where it's more like diminishing returns for each goal or something like that.
Yeah, so I think it's a question of given a set of values, like when I'm near diamonds or like in a range of situations, I'm like trying to come up with plans where I have more diamonds, and also like if I'm near a dog, I'll like go pet the dog, and that's like important, but like not as important when I'm far away from dogs. I think it's like, I think this is how people often feel about dogs. I mean, you don't feel the urge to like go pet a dog as strongly right now as you might if the dog is actually nearby, even if you knew that dog's in the same position regardless. And so like there's this question of what I'm calling values here, or influences on your decision making. Then there's like a question of, well, how do you represent this as a utility function? And I think one thing which I perceive to be a confusion in terms of like, well, how do you aggregate multiple goals into a utility function? Aren't you just like going to find whatever quantity can be made most cheaply relative to the resource consumption, and then just like collapse onto that single, like, well, either like paper clips or staples, but how do you make an agent which cares about both? I think the answer is like these values are not terms in the utility function. Like the values are like influences on the logics of the action, so to speak, right? Like the dog, like what I would call a dog shard or a dog value might upweight logics on actions which lead you petting dogs or plans for petting dogs. And like the diamond one might upweight logics on, well, like plans where you're going to make diamonds. And like if you have a plan which has both diamonds and dogs in it, it would get like logic contributions in both. And so like an agent can care about both things and make decision making like plans on the basis of both things. And then if it represented its own desires as the utility function, that utility function wouldn't necessarily be an additive function of dogs and diamonds. That utility function might have as its domain a very different set of things than what we would intuitively consider to be objects. Like it might be like, well, I value weeks where I've, like a day where I've encountered both dogs and diamonds like quite highly, and like I value, but I like a day where I encounter like only one is quite bad, and like you can't just represent this as like a linear combination of dog utility and diamond utility, for example. So like I think there's values, which I'm talking about, and then there's utility functions, which I think are a whole different beast and are a whole different type signature. Does that make sense?
Okay, so basically, if this agent, so you assume that such an agent could decide to colonize the whole observable universe, and then if they do that, they would do some like complex values thing, like humans would do. Like, okay, it needs to have dogs and diamonds and not always the same dog and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, of course, not committing to dogs or diamonds in particular, but yes, I'd expect value to be complex for AI training this method as well. That is more of an artifact of effective real world training processes, and that humans aren't like particularly unique in that regard. This is also one reason why I'm somewhat more optimistic about alignment. It's like, well, if you have an AI, like the AI develops a bunch of decision-making influences, then as long as at least some of the substantial ones are aligned with us or care about us, then we could still end up okay, even if like 60% of the AI's values are about random garbage, like paper clips or something. So, but that might be a different topic.
So it seems like what you're objecting to is the notion that the thing we need to do to be safe is specified objective function very well, and then actually point the AI at that objective function successfully. And I guess I mostly buy it. I don't know, but I think I originally remember hearing about outer and inner alignment as ways that things fail. So that like one way that things might go wrong is that you fail to specify the objective so that it's actually the thing you want. And another way it might fail is that you get the objective right, but then you try to train the AI and it just develops goals that are different from the objective. Do those still sound like ways that things could go badly? Like, do you think that outer and inner alignment failure are still useful ideas?
So, I think that so I find myself not thinking in those terms anymore. Okay. I think, so one reason probably is that like it's not that if I train an AI, I think a lesson I take from like Goldman's generalization paper isn't like, well, if you mess up the object, or even if you get the objective right, the AI might generalize, or you reward the agent whenever it hits a coin. Like there was no point where you accidentally reward the agent in coin run when it didn't hit a coin. You always rewarded it when it did hit the coin. So like what gives, right? Like why didn't it generalize to like seek out the coin? It's like, well, rather than saying, well, okay, I failed to inner align the AI, I view this as there was this intuitively obvious to me scheme for providing cognitive updates to the agent. There was a target set of values I had in mind, which seemed like they would be achieved by that schedule of cognitive updates. And as a matter of fact, when I trained the agent using the cognitive update generator, it did not develop the intended target values. I think this is like true mechanistically, and also helpful because it points me towards the problem, which was there's something false about my beliefs. There's something wrong when I thought that this cognitive update schedule would provide this, would like accrue into this kind of network. It would make the gradients develop the desired network. And so that's the way I think about it. I think like reward functions don't, like you can kind of, like in chess you're like, yeah, sure, like the reward function represents the winning objective. But like more broadly, if I started thinking about, well, am I like, is the reward function correct? It's like, well, I don't know. Is it going to develop the right, like the desired values in the agent or not? And then it's like, well, correct seems like a weird way for using that phrase. Yeah. Someone else have a hand?
This might be slightly off topic, but you talked about humans being, or you're supposing that humans are, their values come from a kind of RL dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems odd to me that I'm corrigible with that RL dynamic. Like I'm pretty okay with the fact that my values are being changed by some signal, and I'm not interested in like cutting off that signal.
Right.
And yeah, I wonder how this relates to the kind of systems we would train. Like we sort of expect an agent to want to, as soon as it's possible for them to stop whatever system is modifying their values, to immediately take control of that.
Yeah. So I think this expectation is not always correct. I think it's sometimes correct, but not always correct. So you could consider someone who has who's really afraid of spiders, and whenever they see a spider they freak out and like they scream, maybe they run out of the room and they're like, wow, this is really embarrassing, like I really don't want to react this way anymore. And if they shut off the training process, since they can't just directly modify their own brain to lesion the undesired value, so to speak, the undesired influence on their decision making of screaming, if see spider then scream and run, well, if they cut off RL, they wouldn't be able to modify that. And so instead, they might go to exposure therapy for the spider, and they might even carefully avoid thinking about how they'll be touching a spider so as to not activate the undesired influence that will make them afraid. They might even plan around this unendorsed value, where most of the influences on their decision making, most of the more sophisticated ones, like their own health, their own happiness, like hanging out with their friends, their social status, these shards of value, which are steering their decision making, are like, yeah, like screw this stupid like phobia or whatever, right? Like let's find a plan to get rid of it, because perhaps that's predicted to lead to more of these value relevant quantities, increase your status, make you happier, make you more relaxed, right? This is like a positive feature for all these influences on your decision making. And so then these would be like your endorsed values, the ones which can like reflect on the training process and steer it. And your unendorsed spider value might want to be removed by the rest. You might want to make a little like mini progress on yourself by changing what you value. And it would be progress relative to the parts of you which like actually run the show on my model. And so like on this model of what's going on in that situation, you're like, yeah, it's great that they're able to have their values drift some, because it's drifting in a way that's endorsed or positive for most of the influences on decision making which are actually running the show.
So it's an instrumental tool for some values to like take power from other values, like, or to sort of stamp out values that are just not compatible with
Yeah.
the core values that kind of control.
Yeah, and so like you might have some minor aesthetic preference, like, yeah, you know, savannas are nice. And it's not like the rest of your values are like, oh, let's go to like exposure therapy or like desensitizing or like get rid of it. It's not like messing with any of the main things you care about. It's like, yeah, fine, cool, that's just like something I care about. And so for that kind of value, it's not getting stepping on the feet of the other values, so like the main values, so to speak. I'd expect it to be retained all if that's not costly.
But couldn't the signal, in theory, over a long enough time, completely wash out like whatever, you know, like I could end up in, you know, 100 years with completely different values potentially.
Yep.
And like those core values might also get eroded away by that reward signal.
Yep. If you're thinking about like this is getting into an area of what I call the shard theory of human bias, which I developed with Quentin Pope. It was definitely started off his idea, and I helped him develop it. It's getting to like an area where I'm like, yeah, I feel like I don't understand this as much. It's like, well, if I'm like, do I want to stop my values from drifting for like 100 years, or like if I know they're going to change in 100 years? I'm like, no, probably not. If I learn that maybe some like evil psychopath is gonna like modify my values in 50 years unless I lock them in now, then like probably I'd keep them intact, but on current trajectories maybe I wouldn't. And it's like, well, why is this happening? I could give some speculation, but I don't feel like I have anything really strongly pinned down.
If you ask more concretely about like values you have, I think you end up with a different answer than like I know that my values will be different 100 years from now. Like if I ask, I know that in 100 years I am no longer going to love my mother. Probably I will either be like, all right, either like I'm living in the world where my mother is like a secret serial murderer or something, and like I end up learning this 10 or 50 years from now. Or I'm like, all right, I guess I turn into a monster. I don't want that to happen. If I like know my mom isn't a serial murderer, then I may be like, all right, so how can I make it so that I still love my mother in 100 years? Because that seems like a bad state to be in. And if you ask about something more like, you find yourself becoming more cosmopolitan in 100 years, then maybe you're fine with that change. In which case you have like the actual decision influence there was like, or like, not actual decision influence, but like the decision influence which is running the show in this particular case is valuing the virtue of cosmopolitanism in yourself, or like not making decisions based on like the color of people's skin or like their gender or stuff like that.
Victor, do you want to hit the video? And so